Hello everyone, welcome to my Alien Isolation, Nightmare difficulty, no damage, no human kills walkthrough, and this is the San Cristobal Medical Facility. So, this is definitely the point in the game where the Xenomorph is going to become even more of a threat compared to the previous mission in Seeks and Communications, where it was only restricted to the vents. And the only threat you really encounter from the Xenomorph in that section is if you accidentally walked under a vent while its saliva was around, and it just killed you. Now what's going to happen is, alongside that, it's going to have the ability to come down and start walking everywhere, and you're really going to understand how omniscient the Xenomorph can be at times. I mean, you're not going to notice it here, because Mission 5 is incredibly simple. There's even a trophy in Mission 5 where you have to get through this whole entire mission without being killed by the Xenomorph. And it's so easy. As long as you follow the strategies in this walkthrough, you will have no trouble whatsoever. And this really shows the developer's ability to really defy the player's expectations, because if you notice, as I'm moving around, you're seeing a lot of hiding spots, you're seeing a lot of areas to go under tables, and you're seeing just a lot of different rooms you can go into. But it's all there to give the illusion that the Xenomorph is going to be a very big threat, but it actually isn't. But right here, if you sprint during this whole moment, the Xenomorph will not aggro on you quickly. It will be in that whole entire animation. I mean, if you want to watch that animation, go ahead, because it's a really nice-looking animation. It looks so graceful and beautiful, which is quite contradictory to the lethality of this very creature. But I appreciate it nonetheless. But if you do choose to inspect that whole entire animation and just let the Xenomorph resume its neutral state of just walking everywhere to try to find you, you're going to really understand how difficult it is to get past the Xenomorph without the use of distractions, given how omniscient it can be at times, because that's just how the Director AI on the Xenomorph works. There's two AI systems that govern the Xenomorph. There's the Director AI, which tracks whatever you do, and it relays information to the Xenomorph that essentially allows it to be very omniscient, and then there is the Alien AI, which is the AI exclusive to the Xenomorph. And I'm not too sure what this particular AI system governs, but I think it mainly occurs whenever you're trying to hide inside of something, and it allows the Xenomorph to find you very easily. And as I've already mentioned before, there are a lot of different areas that the game is putting inside of these kind of environments, and there are a lot of hiding spots everywhere, but you really don't want to put yourself in a position where you need to use a hiding spot, because Nightmare difficulty really forces you to speed through the game so that you're not getting screwed too much by the Xenomorph's AI and from other AI systems around. It's something that I definitely appreciate, because it definitely forces you to go against your own self-doubt, and when you're actually looking at the section beyond that of the typical average player, it's definitely beneficial in the long run, because you end up finding these really cool strategies to get through these sections. And furthermore, if you were to start on the easier difficulties and then immediately go on to Nightmare difficulty, those kind of players would end up being screwed very easily without properly understanding the systems in play. And Nightmare difficulty really informs those kind of players why easier difficulties are not something you want to start on when it comes to getting started on a game, because harder difficulties showcase the developer's true mentality when it comes to how they view difficulty in a game and how they view what they've managed to achieve with their designs as being functional or not. And to further add on to this, why would you ever want to play on an easier difficulty for a survival horror game? You know, easier difficulties in survival horror games don't make any sense, because it completely violates the whole point of what survival horror is, which is putting you outside of your comfort zone. And, like, how can you ever be scared of anything on an easier difficulty when everything is just at their base value and not exactly, like, threatening? You know, that's something I never really understand when it comes to these kind of games, and it's something I don't really understand about people when they, for instance, try to make their reviews on survival horror games based around easier difficulties. Like, I remember watching a review from a guy who played Resident Evil 3 Remake on easy difficulty, and that therefore made all of his critiques invalidated, because the enemies behave so differently on easy difficulty, the patterns are completely different, everything is just so slow on easy difficulty, and yet he's using that world state to essentially come up with his critiques. And I'm just like, why? It makes no sense. And when he's talking about the Hunter Gammas on Resident Evil 3 Remake and how they go down so easily, That's the point of easy difficulty. They're obviously going to go down very quickly. Like, what the hell is this guy talking about? That has to be one of the most redundant and crass statements I have ever heard. And I just completely dislike that whole entire review based on the fact that he played on easy difficulty and he had no idea how to judge games properly. It was absolutely hilarious. But similarly to this, you know, Nightmare difficulty on this game, everything behaves very differently compared to easy difficulty, and if you're just playing on Nightmare difficulty from the start, it's not going to impact you so much, but if you're playing on the easier difficulties in the beginning, you're not going to really understand how to properly approach this game, and therefore people are going to abuse a lot of hiding spots and a lot of these areas where you can just take cover, and they're just going to get screwed so easily by the AI systems. Oh, and by the way, that whole moment where I'm trying to reactivate the cooling system, the Xenomorph is active, so you have to make sure you're walking the whole entire time. And then this part right here, this is the worst part of Mission 6. This whole entire section is completely random, because the placement of the humans is random, and the humans, as I've already mentioned, are so bullcrap. And the thing I find very confusing is you're about to trigger an emergency evacuation procedure, but it doesn't affect the behavior of the humans. They're still acting like nothing's happening. They're still going on with their, like, static dialogue, and they're just walking around like normal, and they're just hearing you so easily. It's so dumb. It really doesn't make any sense. And the thing I don't understand is, when you trigger the evacuation procedure, certain doors are locked. But that doesn't make any sense. Why would you lock doors during an evacuation procedure? There's no logic to it, and it only serves to force you down this one path that if you get forced down this one path and the humans are in your way, you're screwed. And you have to rely on the Xenomorph in order to get rid of them. And if you trigger the Xenomorph, you're going to run the gambit with the Xenomorph coming out of the vents or not. And it's just going to make getting through this area incredibly difficult. And I actually went through this area again after I did my walkthrough, and I opted to use different strategies for this section right here. I'm going to include that updated strategy at the end of my video, and only at the end. I'm not going to replace it with the one I'm showing right now, because of course, I'm probably picking up items on my original attempt at this that I probably didn't pick up in my updated walkthrough, and of course I need to showcase the proper progression as to how I did my walkthrough so that you can follow exactly what I do. And furthermore, if I'm doing a completely inferior strategy, but I still manage to get through the game easily, then it's very easy for you to make up for my mistakes and just do something completely different, and you will therefore get through the game easily. But something I need to make note of, when you go through that door and the door locks behind you before you turn on the power, it forces the Xenomorph to go into the vents. So when you turn on the emergency evacuation procedure, the Xenomorph is going to be confined to the vents at the moment until you either make noise or it decides to come down itself. But be very careful of these vents. That right there is a very cheeky vent. Some of the vent placements on this game I don't understand because they place it right before a door, and it's a very tight space when it comes to getting past these vents that could potentially have the Xenomorph. And one problem I do have with this whole stalking position that the Xenomorph assumes is, at times, the Xenomorph can teleport to the vent that you're currently under and just attack you. So you check the vent, you don't see saliva, you go under, and the moment you go under it, the Xenomorph just happens to teleport there and kill you. I mean, it happens in rare circumstances, but it has happened to me. So even though you are not seeing any saliva, be extra cautious when going underneath these vents and just go around them. But do you see the humans right there? That is very problematic. If they spotted me just then, they might have shot me, or they might have just followed me and alerted the Xenomorph to my position. It's just so dumb that these humans exist. And right now, the Xenomorph is actually going to emerge right in front of me, and he's not going to spot me, and I get very lucky here. Watch this. This is incredibly tense right here, but look at that. If he was looking at me, I was done for. That was very dangerous just then. I mean, there is a trick that allows you to move very fast, where you just uncrouch for a little bit, but then immediately crouch again, so that the game still thinks you're generating crouch noises as you are getting up off the ground. But at times, the Xenomorph has spotted me while I'm doing that, but this only happens near the end of the game when I'm trying to get out of the observatory area, and I'm trying to backtrack through the Seegson Communications area. That's the only time I've ever been heard by the Xenomorph when I'm doing that trick. But you'll notice, the Xenomorph is suddenly being very omniscient, and knowing kinda where I am. So I'm gonna have to speed up the video here, and I'm just going to hide under this gurney over here in order to ensure that the Xenomorph doesn't spot me. Sometimes you'll have to exit the gurney because the Xenomorph does kind of stand near the gurney, and there is a chance that the Xenomorph could look under the gurney and spot you. But that is the end of that section, and all we have to do now is escape. You're going to take mandatory damage here, and this is something I forgot to mention. If you remember in part 1 of my walkthrough, there was a moment where Ripley fell down through a hole. You actually take mandatory damage off of that. But it doesn't matter because the game does give you back at least 2 medkits, and then you're able to craft medkits yourself. And you're going to take mandatory damage again later on when you get to mission 18 and you're just falling down elevators and then nearly getting killed by trams. But that section represents the final time you'll actually be encountering mandatory damage, as Ripley is doing some very unconventional climbing. And you know, I play a lot of games, but I've never really seen characters do such unconventional climbing like this, with utilizing environments that don't really seem possible to climb. It's very interesting that this game opted for that. But I think I just took damage just then from the smoke, because even if you're pretty fast right here, you will take damage, so I am going to use a medkit here. And then as you progress onward through this vent, after going down the ladder, there is a blasting cap that you can pick up if you don't have enough of that. And then once I drop down and I activate the elevator, this will conclude the medical area. But before I conclude the commentary, I'll show you the alternative strategy for the medical facility in case the humans spawn over here. So you can strike walls with the maintenance jack and it will generate noise, but it's not a lot of noise. So I unfortunately get this moment right here where the humans are on this corridor, so I have to use my revolver to trigger the Xenomorph, and the Xenomorph will protect me from the humans. You know, I'd much rather have the Xenomorph around than any of these really stupid humans. But, of course, because I lured the Xenomorph, it's going to be searching all over the place, and I have to wait for a very long time before it actually goes away. So I'm going to use the crouching exploit, where you uncrouch and crouch again in order to move pretty quickly. I mean, there is a trick you can do on PC that allows you to silently sprint, but I don't think you can do it on console, and I'm not going to be so reliant upon exploits, because I feel like if you're very reliant upon exploits in a survival horror game, you're giving the game more credit than it deserves. It's just not something you're ever wanting to give a survival horror game. Like, I always hate when people use exploits for the Outlast series, even though they are some pretty useful exploits, because it's giving the Outlast series more credit than it deserves. I feel like with exploits such as out-of-bounds glitches, it's kind of cowardly, and I really feel like that's only reserved for cowards and babies who are so easily intimidated by the environment around them. And that's something I'd never opt for in survival horror games. And I just decided to push through them, like the devs intended, utilizing only minor exploits that just allow me to speed up the process and get past certain bullcrap present within a section. But the strategy you're seeing right now is proceeding like normal, and because I've locked the door behind me by getting into this room, and now I'm about to initiate the emergency evacuation procedure, the Xenomorph is going to go into the vents. Oftentimes, the Xenomorph is always going to be in the vent to my left, never really in the vent that I'm currently under right now, but that was still very risky what I did just then. And I'm once again going to utilize the whole method of just moving around this area to try to lose this guy, because this android never leaves this room. When you leave this room, he never follows you out of it. So you're free to resume a stealth status when you exit this room. But because I've killed off most of the humans, there's only one human I have to deal with. And he isn't so much of a problem so long as he's not being very omniscient and spotting you when he shouldn't be able to spot you, or just going into a position where he's trying to demand you go away, but still heading right towards you, which is bullcrap. And I'm going to take the exact same path as last time, and I'm still going to avoid the vents. You see right there, even though there wasn't any saliva dripping out of that vent, I still avoid it. And like I said before, it is a rare possibility, but I still treat it as if it is a problem. But I'm just moving, because I triggered the Xenomorph before doing the lockdown, it's very keen on staying in the vents. And as I said before in part 2, as long as the Xenomorph is in the vent, you are free to walk around normally. But there is that human, his back is to me, so I'm taking this time to use the crouch exploit to move a little bit faster. And I'm able to get to this door without any hassle. And that has been my updated strategy. And this will conclude the medical facility. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.